The Dutton family tree may be hiding one final secret. And if Yellowstone 1944 really follows the path fans now suspect, Spencer Dutton could be the man who finally exposes it. After the heartbreaking ending of 1923, many fans believed Spencer's story was finished. But what if it was never meant to end there? What if the next chapter takes us to a much older Spencer, a new generation of Duttons, and a family secret that could completely change how we understand the bloodline leading to John Dutton III? There is no official 1944 trailer or confirmed cast list yet, and the series remains in development at Paramount. But Brandon Sklenar has already made it clear that if Spencer is alive when 1944 happens, he would want to return to the role. And that single possibility opens a massive question. What happened to Spencer after the final moments of 1923? The answer may begin with the most painful moment of his entire life. Spencer finally reached Alexandra after crossing an ocean, surviving danger, and fighting his way back toward the family he had almost lost. But their reunion came too late. Alexandra died before she could truly begin the life she had dreamed about with Spencer, leaving him with their newborn son, and a future that suddenly looked nothing like the one he had imagined. That child matters because the Dutton family story does not simply move forward through time. It moves forward through loss. Every generation inherits the land, but it also inherits the wounds of the people who came before. And Spencer may be one of the most important links in that chain. Now, move forward to 1944. More than 20 years have passed. The world has changed. America is entering another devastating global conflict, and the young generation of Duttons is old enough to face a war that their parents can only fear. Spencer would no longer be the restless hunter we knew in 1923. He would be an older man carrying decades of memories, including the death of Alexandra and everything he went through to get back to Montana. And that is where the story becomes far more interesting, because Spencer would now be forced to watch the next generation make the same dangerous choices that once defined his own life. Imagine the emotional weight of that. Spencer knows what war does to a person because he lived through it himself. He knows what it means to leave home believing you will return. He knows what it means to see friends disappear and to carry memories that never truly leave. So when his own son reaches the age where military service becomes possible, Spencer would not simply be watching a young man go to war. He would be watching his own past repeat itself. That could become the emotional heart of Yellowstone 1944. But there is another mystery buried underneath Spencer's story, and this one could be even more important. What exactly happened to the different branches of the Dutton family after 1923? By the time Yellowstone begins in the modern era, the family tree appears clear from a distance. But the prequels have repeatedly shown us that the Dutton bloodline is anything but simple. Children are separated from parents, families disappear, names are forgotten, relationships end before anyone understands how important they will become decades later. And that is why Spencer's return would matter so much. If 1944 brings him back, the series would have the opportunity to finally show what happened to the generation that connected 1923 to the modern Dutton family. It could explore the childhood of John Dutton II, the man who eventually becomes the father of Kevin Costner's John Dutton III. It could also answer questions about the people around Spencer who were left behind when 1923 ended. Some of those answers may be emotional. Others could completely reshape the family tree. One of the biggest unanswered questions comes from the children introduced or referenced at the end of 1923. Elizabeth's pregnancy, Spencer and Alexandra's son, and the possibility of other branches of the family create a complicated timeline that 1944 could finally explore. And if the series chooses to place these characters in the same period, then the conflict may not simply be about who controls the ranch. It could be about who truly belongs to the future of the Dutton family. That is what makes the title of this story so important. The secret may not be a hidden enemy, a mysterious land deal, or another outside threat. It may be something much closer to home. It may be the truth about the Dutton bloodline itself. The official information available right now is still limited. Paramount has not released a confirmed cast list or a real trailer for 1944, and recent reporting says the project remains in development rather than being officially canceled. That means any story about Spencer returning, Elizabeth returning, or specific family events in 1944 should be treated as theory unless Paramount officially confirms them. But theories become interesting when they fit the history the franchise has already created. And Spencer fits perfectly. He is the character who understands both sides of the Dutton legacy. He knows the violence that created the family's future, and he knows the emotional cost of protecting it. In 1923, he was fighting to get back to his family. In 1944, the story could reverse that completely. This time, Spencer may be the one standing at home, waiting, worrying, and wondering whether the person he loves will return. That would turn his character into something completely different. He would no longer be the young man running toward danger. He would be the father terrified of losing someone to it. And if Yellowstone 1944 follows the same emotional tradition as 1883 and 1923, that is exactly the kind of change that could make Spencer's return devastating. The franchise has never been afraid to show that the Dutton legacy comes with a price. Every generation gets closer to the ranch, but every generation also loses something along the way. So the biggest question may not be whether Spencer Dutton returns. It may be what kind of man he has become when we finally see him again. Because if Spencer is standing on the Yellowstone Ranch in 1944, older, scarred, and surrounded by the family he fought so hard to protect, then one thing is almost certain. The past has finally caught up with him. And this time, he may not be able to save everyone. But Spencer's story may only be the beginning of the mystery. Because once we move deeper into the 1944 timeline, the biggest question becomes impossible to ignore. What happened to the Dutton family during the 20 years between 1923 and 1944? The franchise has already shown us the beginning of the bloodline, but there is still a huge part of the story that remains hidden. And that missing chapter could contain the secret that changes everything. At the center of that mystery is John Dutton II. His birth at the end of 1923 was not just another emotional moment, it created one of the most important links in the entire Yellowstone timeline. John Dutton II would eventually become the father of John Dutton III, the character played by Kevin Costner in Yellowstone. That means the events surrounding John Dutton II are directly connected to the family fans already know. His childhood, his relationship with Spencer, and the people who helped raise him could reveal why the modern Dutton family became the way it did. And this is where 1944 becomes much more than another prequel. It could be the missing bridge. For years, fans have known the names of the Duttons who came before John Dutton III, but knowing a name is not the same as knowing the story. What kind of father was Spencer? What kind of son was John Dutton II? Did John grow up knowing everything about his mother? Did Alexandra's memory remain powerful inside the ranch? Or did Spencer eventually stop talking about the woman he lost? And perhaps, most importantly, did John Dutton II understand what his father had sacrificed to bring him into this world? These questions matter because the modern Dutton family is built around one idea above everything else. The land must survive. John Dutton III carries that belief almost like a religion. He spends his entire life protecting the Yellowstone Ranch, even when that protection costs him relationships, peace, and eventually his own safety. But where did that obsession come from? Was it inherited from his father? Was it passed down from Spencer? Or did something happen during John Dutton II's childhood that made the ranch feel less like a home and more like a responsibility? That is the kind of question 1944 could finally answer. And there is another possibility that makes the family tree even more complicated. Elizabeth. At the end of 1923, Elizabeth was pregnant with Jack Dutton's child. Her story was left open, and that creates a huge gap between what fans saw in 1923 and what they know about the later Dutton generations. If 1944 chooses to bring Elizabeth back, she would not simply be returning as a familiar face. She could represent an entirely different branch of the family. Her child would now be a young adult, and that young adult would have grown up knowing the Dutton name from a different perspective. Think about what that means. One branch of the family could be living at or near the Yellowstone Ranch, while another branch grows up somewhere else. One child could inherit Spencer's memories and Alexandra's legacy. Another could inherit Jack and Elizabeth's connection to the ranch. Both could have Dutton blood. Both could believe they have a place in the family's future. But the Yellowstone Ranch is not an ordinary inheritance. There is only one ranch, and that creates the possibility of a conflict that would be far more personal than anything the Duttons have faced before. Imagine two young Dutton men looking at the same piece of land and believing they are protecting their family's future. Neither one has to be evil. Neither one has to betray the other. They could simply have different ideas about what the Dutton legacy means. One might believe the ranch must remain untouched. The other might believe survival requires change. And Spencer would be standing directly between them. That would make his role incredibly powerful because Spencer has already experienced the consequences of family conflict. He knows what happens when pride becomes more important than people. He also knows what happens when someone waits too long to make the right choice. But there is an even darker possibility. What if the secret is not simply about who inherits the ranch? What if it is about who was never supposed to inherit it at all? The Yellowstone universe has repeatedly shown that family secrets do not disappear just because people stop talking about them. They become buried inside the next generation. A child grows up without knowing the full story. A parent refuses to explain what happened. A name disappears from the family conversation. Then, decades later, someone discovers the truth and realizes that the history they believed was complete was never complete at all. That could be the real purpose of 1944, to reveal the missing pieces. And if Spencer returns, he would be the one person capable of explaining them. He could tell John Dutton II what Alexandra was like. He could explain why she died. He could explain what happened during the years he spent away from Montana. He could tell his son why the Dutton name matters, and why the ranch was never simply a piece of property. But Spencer might also have secrets of his own. The 1923 story left his future largely unexplored. Decades have passed by 1944. A man does not survive that much time without changing. Spencer may have made choices he never expected to make. He may have relationships he never imagined. He may have children who were never part of the original Dutton story. And that possibility connects directly to one of the most intriguing theories surrounding the franchise, the idea that Spencer had another son after Alexandra's death. Whether that theory becomes part of 1944 remains completely unconfirmed, but if the series does explore it, the emotional consequences could be enormous. Because imagine Spencer raising one child who represents the woman he lost, while another child represents the life he built afterward. Those two children would not simply be half-brothers. They would represent two different versions of Spencer's life, one connected to Alexandra, one connected to survival. And if both eventually become part of the Dutton story, Spencer would have to confront a painful question. Can he give both children the same place in his heart when the entire family legacy seems to favor one branch over another? That question could become even more dangerous once the war begins. World War II would place enormous pressure on the younger generation. A Dutton son could leave Montana believing he is fighting for his country, while Spencer remains behind knowing exactly what that decision could cost. Every letter would carry emotional weight. Every silence could feel like a warning. And if the franchise follows its established pattern, the war will not simply be background. It will become the force that changes the family forever. Because war has a way of deciding things that families spend decades trying to avoid. A son leaves, a father waits, a family changes. And when the son finally returns, or fails to return, the people left behind have to decide what comes next. That is where Spencer's tragedy could become complete. He survived his own war. He survived losing Alexandra. He survived the years of raising their child. But surviving does not mean escaping the consequences of the past. By 1944, Spencer could finally discover that the greatest battle of his life was never the one he fought overseas. It was the battle to keep his family together. And if the Dutton family's secret is finally revealed during that struggle, the consequences could reach far beyond Spencer. They could explain the family that John Dutton III eventually becomes part of. They could explain why the ranch means so much. They could even explain why the Duttons have spent generations believing that losing the land would be worse than losing almost anything else. But there is still one question left. If Spencer is the bridge between the old Dutton generation and the one that eventually leads to John Dutton III, then what happens when that bridge begins to collapse? Because the closer we get to the modern timeline, the fewer mysteries remain. And that means 1944 may be the final opportunity to reveal the truth before the story reaches the family fans already know. The secret is getting closer, and Spencer may be the only person who knows where it is buried. The closer Yellowstone 1944 gets to the modern Dutton timeline, the more dangerous the family secret becomes. Because this is no longer just a story about Spencer Dutton surviving another chapter of his life. It is about the final pieces of the family history falling into place. And one of those pieces could completely change what fans thought they knew about the Dutton legacy. If Spencer does return, his presence could give 1944 something the other prequels never had, a character who already knows exactly where the family story is heading. He knows what has been lost. He knows what the ranch cost. And most importantly, he knows that the Dutton name does not guarantee happiness. It guarantees responsibility. That could make his relationship with John Dutton II incredibly important. John would be growing up under the shadow of a father who has already experienced unimaginable loss. Spencer may want to protect his son from the pain he suffered, but protecting a Dutton from the world has never been easy. Eventually, every generation has to face the same choice: leave the ranch behind and live freely, or stay and carry the family legacy. And by 1944, that choice could become even harder because of the war. If John Dutton II or another young Dutton is pulled toward military service, Spencer could be forced to relive everything he spent years trying to forget. The difference is that this time, he would not be the soldier. He would be the father waiting at home. That reversal could become one of the most emotional parts of the entire prequel story. But the biggest revelation may come from the family itself. The Dutton bloodline has never been as simple as it looks. Branches have disappeared. Children have grown up away from the ranch, relationships have been left unresolved, and the story of Elizabeth and her child could potentially add another layer to that complicated history. If Elizabeth returns, 1944 could finally explain what happened after she left Montana. Her child would now be old enough to make decisions that affect the future of the family. And if that character comes face to face with Spencer's family, old questions could suddenly become impossible to avoid. Who truly belongs at Yellowstone? Who should inherit the family legacy? And what happens when two people with the same blood believe they have different futures? Those questions could create the kind of emotional conflict Yellowstone has always handled best. Not a simple battle between good and evil, but a battle between people who all believe they are protecting something important. And then there is the secret that could sit at the center of everything: the truth about Spencer's family after Alexandra. If the rumored second son ever becomes part of the story, the consequences could be enormous. It would introduce another branch of Spencer's life that fans have never properly seen. It could explain why certain names disappeared from the Dutton history and why the modern family seems to know so little about what happened during these missing decades. But until Paramount officially confirms those details, they remain theories, not established facts. What we do know is that 1944 has the perfect place in the timeline to answer these questions. It sits between the emotional world of 1923 and the modern Dutton family we eventually meet in Yellowstone. That makes it more than another chapter. It could be the final bridge, and that is why Spencer's possible return is so important. He is not simply a familiar face coming back for nostalgia, he is the connection between generations. The man who remembers Alexandra, the father of John Dutton II, the survivor who understands what the Dutton name really costs. If Yellowstone 1944 uses him properly, Spencer could become the emotional heart of the story rather than just another character in the background. And perhaps that is exactly why his return would be so powerful. Because the young Spencer we met in 1923 believed he could escape his past. The older Spencer of 1944 would know better. He would understand that the past never really leaves the Duttons. It waits for the next generation, and eventually, it comes back. So while fans wait for official casting announcements, production updates, and a real first look, one thing remains clear: the potential story of Yellowstone 1944 is much bigger than another Dutton prequel. It could reveal how John Dutton II became the man who connected Spencer's generation to the modern family. It could finally explain what happened to the other branches of the Dutton bloodline. It could bring Elizabeth's unresolved story back into focus. And it could show Spencer facing the one thing he has spent his entire life trying to survive: the possibility of losing another person he loves. The Dutton family has always believed the ranch is worth fighting for. But 1944 could ask a much harder question. What if protecting the ranch means losing the people you love? That is the question that could define the entire series.